Goes Reviews. Used just I review it, and welcome back to the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise review. Today we're in the home stretch here as we're taking a look at Nightmare on Elm Street Part 5, The Dream Child from 1988.
His mother was a God-fearing woman. His birth was an unspeakable horror. Please don't let him do that! His life and death have been one incredible nightmare. But now all that is going to change because Freddy wants to become a daddy. Want to make babies?
What's wrong with me? She's just a little pregnant.
Even if he has to adopt.
No! It's one born baby's dream.
When it comes to chills.
It happened while I was awake.
When it comes to screams. The part just start. When it comes to pure terror. Bon appetit. No one delivers like Freddy. Better buckle up.
All right, Krueger. This time it's for keeps.
A Nightmare on Elm Street 5. The Dream Child. It's a boy! When it comes to terror, remember, Freddy knows best.
So Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child, was released in 1989, and this film picks up a couple of years after the last movie, and Alice, still played by Lisa Wilcox, and her boyfriend Dan are graduating high school with their new group of friends, Greta, Maya, and Mark. However, things get strange when Alice is appeared to be having strange nightmares about Freddy, but not the Freddy we all know. But after Freddy comes back to life again and manages to kill Dan, yes, once again killing off one of the survivors from the last movie, Alice finds out that she's pregnant and that her unborn baby can apparently still dream. And apparently Freddy's plan is to give the baby the souls of his victims so he can be reborn through the baby. Yep, that's the plot. So yeah, as you can probably tell, this film's ridiculous. Incredibly, incredibly ridiculous. And it's finally happened, folks. This is the movie where Freddy became slowly transforming more and more into a friggin' Looney Tune. I say this because all Freddy does throughout this entire movie is just spew out a whole bunch of shitty one-liners, and none of them are funny. Ugh. To make matters worse, Robert Englund kind of wasted in this movie. I mean, yeah, he's there as Freddy, but Freddy's doesn't really look that great. The makeup also looks pretty shitty. Kind of looks like Freddy looks like an ugly old grandpa with burn scars on his face. Also, there's not that many kills. Only 3 people die in this movie. That's the lowest body count of any Freddy movie. Well, actually, no, it's the lowest body count of any Freddy movie. The characters also are very uninteresting. I mean, aside from Alice, who is still there, all the characters are not that interesting. I mean, her father is no longer a drunken asshole, so I guess that's something. Dan, well, not much to say about Dan. I guess he's the same, but he dies anyway, so what's the point? All the other characters just have a bunch of quirky characteristics that aren't really valued. Like, for example, Greta is a girl who likes to make dolls and has been pressured to be a model. Yeah. Mark is a comic book nerd who makes gory comic books, though gore bothers him in real life, which that is a real fear, by the way. People can handle gory movies, but gore in real life. That's because we know the difference between fake and real. Also, I do know that if I end up going crazy and going on a killing rampage, well, that is another place we're gonna have a fucking field day with that. Another thing this film doesn't have going for it is the gore is kind of silly. I mean, at this time around, they were pressured by the MPAA, like a bunch of other horror movies around this time, to tone down the violence, otherwise they'd get an R rating. This has become painfully obvious in this movie. I say this because all the kills in this film are so fucking boring, and there's no creativity. Okay, I guess there's creativity, but they're not really good creativity. For example, when Freddy first comes back, he of course targets Dan. And what he does is falls asleep in his truck, which is a terrible idea. Then he starts hearing his mother on the radio complaining about him. Then Freddy shows up in the car, makes Dan's seatbelt attack him, then uses the wine Dan brought, starts using it as acid to spit out the dashboard. Freddy then melts his arm off and attaches it to use it as a seatbelt. Dan gets flung out of the truck, winds the back of the pool where he was, but this time he can't get into his truck, and he sees a motorcycle with the keys of the ignition. So let me get this straight, Dan. You know you're on Freddy's turf, you have seen him, and he is trying to kill you. Do you really think the convenient motorcycle with the keys right in the ignition is really your best option? Of course he goes for it, because, well, on the bright side, at least it makes for an interesting scene. And Freddy starts making all the tubing and wiring and basically everything on the motorcycle and start going inside Dan's body, turning him into a sort of bio-skin mechanical demon. Apparently they had to tone this scene down to get a proper R rating. In the initial cut, we just see the wiring and tubing and stabbing Dan's arms and legs. But in the extended cut, we actually see them go inside his body, and the result is pretty cool. Of course, that's not what kills Dan. Dan wakes up in the real world and crashes his truck. Then Freddy possesses him to make a really lame joke, and then he dies. Yeah, sure, why not kill off one of the few likable characters from Dream Master? Why not? Then there's Greta, who is at a dinner party with a bunch of people, one of them happened to be her mother. And what Freddy does is he straps her down to a demonic wheelchair, pulls out a doll that looks like Greta, cuts open the stomach, and starts force-feeding the food. Now what they don't show you, first of all, the first thing they don't show you is Freddy using his claws to cut the doll open. Come on, it's a fucking doll. You have to be a real pussy not to show that. Then he starts force-feeding this food from the stomach. And then he removes the tray, revealing that he's actually ripping the food. There's actually a hole in Greta's stomach that he's ripping the food out of. Which makes the "you are what you eat" line make a lot more sense. Then he starts, patting her back like to burp her, but she's choking to death on her food. She gets filled up so much food her cheeks start inflating, so Freddy starts choking her, and then she dies. Alright. Then there's Mark, whose death is probably the weirdest one. Mark falls asleep reading a comic book called Nightmares from Hell, which is basically a illustration of what the hell's going on. He gets sucked into the comic. Then he is in a black and white world, and I don't mean like everything is black and white. I mean the set is actually purposely colored to look black and white. They actually took the effort to do that, and Mark's in color. And they even made a separate makeup and outfit for Freddy. Freddy starts chasing Mark while riding a skateboard. Alright? And Mark turns into his superhero, the Phantom Prowler, shoots Freddy, but then Freddy comes up as a Super Freddy. Not Super Freddy. Super Freddy sucks. And slashes at Mark, only to reveal that the slash had turned Mark into a 2D paper version of himself. That Freddy begins slashing up like a salad. And apparently they kept constantly cutting away. Okay, this is the one where I think the NPA are just a bunch of pussies. It's paper being shredded. The worst that happens is the color leaks out of them. Apparently they didn't show us. Apparently the one thing they couldn't show was his head being cut off. Really? And by the way, in the real world, that's not what killed Mark. What killed Mark is that one of the columns in the warehouse collapsed and fell on him and crushed him. And also, throughout the movie, Alice is seeing this little boy named Jacob, who is revealed to be her unborn child that she's seeing in her dreams. You know what? At this point, I don't care, so let's just wrap this shit up. After Freddy's killed three of Alice's friends, she decides to have a little one-on-one fight while Lisa, Alice's still living friend, looks for Freddy's mother's corpse, which was apparently in the tower of the old asylum from Dream Warriors. She then touches her shoulder, which causes her to vanish to appear in the dream world, and then Jacob uses his dream powers to blast all the souls of Freddy's current victims out of him, making him turn back into a baby and having his mother absorb him. So, then the movie ends with 9 months later, Jacob has been born, and everyone lives happily friggin' ever after. Until Freddy comes back in the next movie, of course, but we'll get to that soon. Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child, is a disappointment movie. It's not as... At least it was something unlike the last one, but it still is a pretty silly film. But, with that said, it's not as bad as the next movie. We'll get to the next time, but until then, I'm Go the Reviewer. And remember, you are what you eat.